internal government assessments have warned that the UK should prepare for the sudden collapse of the Putin regime following an attempted coup by Wagner Group mercenaries.
Well, yesterday, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the insurrection showed that cracks are beginning to show in Vladimir Putin's power and warned that this isn't the end of the story.
How did that story start? Where does it go to? Defence editor of the Evening Standard. Can't wait to talk to Robert Fox. Robert, did you see this coming, my friend?
I saw it coming about 3 days before it happened because I was finding I was getting very interesting remarks from in and around the defence and government circles. Actually, the Brits and the Americans began to suspect something was up in the aftermath of the bridge being blown by the British missiles, Storm Shadow. And at the same time, you may remember that Prigozhin started making his move. He started accusing the hierarchy in Moscow of running a war in Ukraine to stuff the pockets of the oligarchs from what they could seize from Kiev. We knew trouble was on its way. And as you were rightly saying, following Antony Blinken, it looks as if the trouble isn't over.
And what do you mean? What do you mean by that? It looks as though Putin suppressed the trouble. He's either bought this guy off, this guy who leads the Wagner Group. What do you think the deal has been? What was the deal that has been done? What do you think it was?
Well, nobody really knows because there have been two very dubious sources who have said that he was paid a bit of money, that part of the Wagner would disintegrate, would dissolve, and part of them would join the Russian armed forces. He would go to Belarus. It's only Dmitry Peskov, not very well known for 100% accurate truth-telling, the spokesman for Putin, and Mr. Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, who's been a very dodgy figure in the past and has a lot of bubbling protest in his own country for his last as they see it, stolen election. Why I think everybody, from what we can see, is so concerned is look at the body language or the non-body language of Mr. Putin. Of the principal players, it's a huge game of now you see me, now you don't. Once Rostov-on-Don and Voronezh were taken over very peacefully, if it really was a takeover, does that look like a takeover that you're looking at in the picture of Prigozhin there? It was absolutely clear that he was panicked, Putin. He goes on telly, he says, stab in the back, this is just like 1917, it's what's happened over again in Russian history, I'm going to these people are traitors. This is absolute treason. We will crack down hard. And then we have to wait several hours to hear that a convoy is turned back on the road of Moscow. Money has been paid. But perhaps the most significant images were the Wagner Group leaving Rostov-on-Don with flowers in the barrels of the tanks and crowds cheering them.
It was...
Putin, visibly, almost for the first time, is quite clearly, to the Russian television viewing public, is not Mr. Popular.
There's so many aspects to all of this, James. I mean, Putin's got an air force. The Wagner Group don't have. They're 25,000 in number. Would they really have been able to stage that coup? What have they got that the Russians don't have?
What they have is momentum, and they have an ability to do Putin's dirty work. And that's quite clearly what they were doing in some of the most dreadful fighting in Ukraine. They've been going as a going concern for about 10 years and done a lot of the really rough stuff in Syria, in Libya, and of course in West Africa, where they have been stuffing their pockets, taking over things like gold mines. So that's what they have. But where you are absolutely right, look at the non-performers. One of the most staggering things over the past 16 months is the poor performance of the Russian Air Force. Whose side are they on? They're getting a bit committed to ground attack against the advancing offensive of the Ukrainians, where they've been a bit effective. But actually, the Russians have been relying a lot on their attack helicopters. They have worked in making life difficult for the Ukrainian advance, but they haven't stopped it. What is happening, as I said, all the people we're not seeing at the moment. We've not seen Putin again. You would have expected he would come out with a big statement. This is what's going to happen. We're all together and we're fighting for Russia's national survival now. We haven't heard from Shoigu, the defense minister, who Prigozhin criticized. He said that was his main target of criticism with the commander-in-chief, Gerasimov. We haven't heard from him either. The Russians are going on attacking Ukraine with drones, with fighting on the front line, as if they're on autopilot. This is why this is going to develop almost hour by hour over the next 2 or 3 days. And it looks as if Putin, if he's ever been in the woods, isn't out of the woods yet. And that's why Blinken is warning. By the way, this is a prime aim of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It wasn't just to get boots and tanks and barrels and Leopard 2s and Challenger tanks on the ground a few kilometers up the road. I'm not being facetious there, because that is really hard work. That's an important part of it. But it was to shake the regime, to shake the command of the Russians, to make them think again. And in ways that we don't quite understand fully yet, they've done it.
And Robert, what does this mean for the war in Ukraine? Because, I mean, Ukrainians watching over the weekend would have been quite pleased, wouldn't they, to have seen the Russians tearing each other apart. But there'll be concern now, won't there, about how Putin will have taken this. He's been seen to look weak in Russia, and there is going to be concern that he will now ramp things up in Ukraine.
Yes, Isabel. I think the most dangerous point, if I was to point at a place on the map, is Zaporizhia again, the Zaporizhia power plant, because we heard this for weeks and months about the Kakhovka Dam before they blew it, and it's absolutely clear now that the Russians blew it. There were pre-positioned explosives. It took a lot to blow that dam. We got the same round several of the cooling towers in the Zaporizhia power plant. They've been mined. They've got explosives around it. Now, if Putin goes, and he would be going really bad if he did that, because the pollutant effect. Think of the Chernobyl disaster in '86. This would be many, many times greater, according to the International Atomic Energy Authority. It's that kind of thing that if he's desperate and wants a desperate move, I think we've got to be ready to see them do that. And I think the Ukrainians are well aware of that too.
And would the Ukrainians be able to strike any advances? Could they take advantage of what the Wagner Group have done here?
Yes, because I think that what they will find is there are a lot of reluctant Russian troops to get into the dirty fighting and the horrible holes that the Wagner Group got, particularly on the Bakhmut front. There is an advantage there. But don't expect the main initiative to come full frontal. It won't come in the center of the front. I think it will come round the edges. And what Mr. Putin knows, and it's the jewel in his crown, his real success in 2014, I think Crimea is looking very vulnerable. I don't see it being invaded, but I see it being strangled. Already seen moves. There's no fresh water from the west after the Kakhovka Dam and after the bridge was blown. One of the main supply routes to and from Crimea and to the front has been cut.
I know we're talking military matters, Robert, and this may not be your area of expertise, but diplomacy. Would there be anyone on the Putin side of things, on the Russian side of things, who would be suing for peace? So if Putin is sidelined, he faces an election next year, but if he goes before that, would there be any chance of the diplomatic map changing?
Look, this war is not just exclusively military. It's about perception, it's about information, it's the first digital war, and again, it's a game of shadows. So diplomacy, as you put it, is very much part of the game. I would think that this has been in train for some time. Probes, leaks. It's amazing what the perception has been over the past few days and weeks. And it is quite clear, not this last weekend, but the weekend before, London and Washington knew something was up, that all was not well in the house of Putin. So they will be looking for that. But what Zelensky, and particularly his commanders, will be saying to the West, don't give up now. We've shown vulnerabilities in protection from close air attack on the front line. Come and help us, bring your stuff in. And by the way, you've been very generous with advice, with kit, but get your act together. Be coherent, be consistent, have all these systems that will work together, help us build up our own defense industries, because you've got to have a rolling plan for months and for reconstruction and development, as we know, for years to come. And there is big fear in Kiev that, that governments, particularly like the British and the American, are going to pull back, say we haven't got enough money, we've run out of ammunition stocks. And I think that's going to be the main subject at the Vilnius, Lithuania NATO summit next month. Stick with the program. The main effort for all our values and existence as a NATO treaty is Ukraine.